Good afternoon, sir. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brenda, I've got a few more questions on the case of Hamilton, and then we will move on to the other two case studies, but they'll be quite brief. And then I have a few miscellaneous topics, some of which have been suggested by other core participants.
Okay.
Can we begin, please, with poll 00118745, please? This is a letter dated the 30th of June 2006 to the manager at Nationwide Building Society. It's a letter that you wrote, and I'm just going to read to you from it. You say there that Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton have given you signed authority for bank account details to be disclosed to you. Unfortunately, to date, I've not received any such details from you. As this information has been requested as part of a criminal investigation that I am conducting, I would be grateful if you would arrange for copies of the requested statements to be sent to me as soon as possible. So are we to understand from this that Jo Hamilton had given you signed authority to obtain her bank details for the relevant period of the offending, of the alleged offending? Can we just look back at your witness statement for this inquiry? That's WITN 083000100, and it's page 24. Page 24, paragraph 85, please. Sorry, it's actually page 25, paragraph 93. It's at the very end of that paragraph, at the very bottom of the page. It begins I, and then if we scroll down over the page, it says, I can also see that I sought to obtain bank statements relating to Ms. Hamilton. Do you think that is a fair reflection of the evidence? I mean, one thing you don't mention there is that Miss Hamilton had given you permission. It reads perhaps as though you sought to obtain them from Mrs. Hamilton, but have not been provided with them.
Sorry, I think that was just a summary of the inquiries I conducted.
Yes. So what you don't say there is Mrs. Hamilton gave me authorization to obtain her bank statements, but I unfortunately was or wasn't successful in obtaining them from the bank itself.
No, but it would have been in other, the reports and that were being submitted and were part of the bundle.
But for the purposes of this inquiry, do you think it might have been helpful in that statement to have said Mrs. Hamilton actually gave permission for me to access her bank statement?
Okay, I must say it wasn't a deliberate omission, but yeah, apologies if it should have been added.
Do you think that the fact that she had given authority to obtain her bank statements was a relevant factor to consider when weighing up an offence of dishonesty?
Not necessarily, because there may not have been any evidence of criminality in the bank accounts, and I wouldn't have known what bank accounts she held, so I would have only been submitting requests for ones that she gave authority to.
And you're an investigator, but presumably you had the power to obtain information as to how many bank accounts a person had, didn't you?
I can't recall what powers I know that we would, almost as a matter of course, asked if they would sign authority for bank accounts. I know that we subsequently had a financial investigation team that had powers. I'm not sure whether I had any powers other than doing it on a voluntary basis.
When you're weighing up whether somebody was dishonest, if they've given you permission to contact their bank and to obtain their statements and to look to see, for example, whether they were leading a particular lifestyle,
Yeah.
do you think that that might be worth considering when you're weighing up whether somebody was dishonest or not?
Well, not necessarily, because as I said, I don't know whether I'd have been given authority for all bank accounts. Also, people, sometimes with looking at bank accounts, it's not always what you see, it's what you don't see. So they might not have been aware of that. So, for example, if certainly, going back several years, people used to purchase things with cash more so than they do cards these days. So, if, for instance, I'm looking, they might have thought, okay, that I haven't paid any fraudulent deposits into my account, so they won't find anything. But I might also be looking for the fact: have you been making any cash withdrawals? I.e., how have you paid at the cash and carry for your suppliers, for your private business? How have you paid for money for your food? So again, I might be looking at something that isn't there, i.e. cash withdrawals to sustain just basic living, and the person may have given authority, not realising that I will be looking at other things other than just, boom, here's a deposit that looks like it's criminality.
So you didn't have powers to obtain those bank statements by compulsion.
I don't recall. I may have done, but I don't recall.
The way that you would go about it normally would be to request that they sign authority over to
Yes.
you, and you would use that authority to go through and not just check for any excessive amounts within the bank statement, but also for cash transactions,
Yeah.
etc. Isn't the fact that somebody is volunteering that information, volunteering that statement, something that you thought merits consideration in weighing up whether they were dishonest?
Well, not necessarily, but it was clearly reported to the criminal law team that that's an inquiry I had looked to conduct. So if they want to place any credence on it, they could have done, but I don't think so for the reasons I've just given.
But you were providing opinions as to offences. So it's relevant to your own consideration of whether offences have been committed as well as the criminal law teams, isn't it? And was that
As I
something?
said, from recollection, I don't think I placed any emphasis on whether somebody did or didn't, but ultimately, I think from the documentation says I wrote to 2 banks, and 2 banks are saying, well, I think the answer was given they hadn't received them. So I went back to Mr. Hamilton and asked if she wouldn't mind signing them again, which I know was an inconvenience, but I don't appear to have had a response.
If somebody hadn't provided you with the original authority to contact their bank, you would have held that against them, wouldn't you, in weighing up dishonesty?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's hard to think back what my mindset would have been at that time, but I don't think so.
So the
certainly at
act
the
of
time we had-
obtaining a bank
Sorry.
statement didn't matter one way or another.
As I say, it's really hard to think back to what my mindset would have been at that time, but certainly I don't know when the Financial Investigation Unit came into force, but they would, I think they could do, was it production orders, something like that?
Yes. And how would that affect things?
Sorry, say again?
How would that affect your decision making? If you had the power to obtain a bank statement via a production order,
Yeah.
but in fact the person you were investigating said, I don't mind signing a piece of paper that allows you access to my bank
Yeah.
statements, did it still not make any material
I'm not sure I
difference
had
to
any
your decision
thoughts on
making?
it, because they would, certainly in the case of Miss Hamilton, she took advice, and her solicitor, I believe from the documentation, advised that it was okay to do so. I don't think I had any firm opinion that it was being authorised. Sometimes the advice from the solicitor was do so, sometimes it was not do so, and I would just report accordingly. I don't think I had any real thoughts on it.
Can we look at poll 00118610? This is a further 2 memo in the case of Hamilton, on the 11th of August 2006. You provide some information further to inquiries. Could we please turn to page 4? I just want to ask you a few questions about this. The first substantive paragraph there says, I have spoken to Mr. Graham Ward, Investigation Team Casework Manager, who advises that a standard statement could be obtained from Fujitsu covering the fact that the discrepancies would not be due to system error. First of all, who was Graham Ward and why was he the relevant person to approach?
At that time, Graham was the casework manager.
And why would he be the person to approach for a statement from Fujitsu?
But I think at the time, as I said earlier, I think when we had sort of like links to Fujitsu, and that was either, I think at the time, the casework team, and then I think later on, I think the main person was like Jane Owen in the crime risk team.
And what did you understand by a standard statement from Fujitsu that could cover the fact that discrepancies would not be due to system error?
I can only assume that was, you know, the standard statement that we would get when, like for instance, when they're producing ARC data, but basically, as it suggests, a standard statement that would cover the integrity of Fujitsu, I believe.
The integrity of Horizon.
Sorry, yeah, the integrity of Horizon.
The next paragraph, in respect of MBSC calls, Mr. Ian Speck, Service Review Manager, has advised me that it's impossible to highlight what call may have caused a discrepancy. He basically states that discrepancies are due to mistakes made at the post office branch, either directly with the customer, which wouldn't be recoverable, or by incorrectly using Horizon, which would usually be recoverable by means of an error notice, now called transaction correction, being generated when a mismatch in the accounting becomes apparent. And he refers to an email. The fact that an error could generate a discrepancy, is that something that would be relevant to your consideration as to whether somebody had committed an offence of dishonesty?
Sorry, can you say that again?
You're being told by the, in respect of the NBSC, that it was possible for there to be a discrepancy as a result of user error. Yeah. Is that something to weigh up when you are considering whether somebody has committed an offence of dishonesty?
Yeah, I'm going to say that obviously there's some things called human error, and if there was an error made, it could be something that could be identified. If, say, for instance, you're serving on the counter and you give somebody £10 too much change, unless the customer's noticed and is honest and says you give me £10 too much, that's not going to be recoverable. If somebody's entered something on Horizon, and when the physical document, or if it's like an online transaction, but either way, when it's married up with the actual transaction, if it's identified as there's an error, then obviously a transaction correction would be produced, and that would be sent back to the branch. So yeah, so absolutely, human error can occur.
And did you, in this case, consider whether, for example, human error, or the fact that a human error could result in a discrepancy, might be something to take into account when considering whether the alleged offender was acting dishonestly?
Well, I think this is the reason why I've gone to Mr. Speck in the first place, and he's basically saying it's impossible to highlight what would have caused the discrepancy. So can the fact that a discrepancy can be caused by user error, did that feature in your thinking in respect of criminality, an offence of dishonesty? If it's somebody's made an error, then that's not going to be criminality unless it was maybe a deliberate error to hide something. But yeah, human error can occur, and that wouldn't be, in the main part, a criminal offence.
And your response to that is, having looked at the call logs myself, I cannot see anything that relates to a single or multiple discrepancies that would account for the audit deficit. So your response to that was to check the call logs, was it? Rather than the underlying ARQ data, for example?
Yeah, I'm looking at the call logs, and I can see reference to what we've mentioned earlier, the actual discrepancies that Ms Hamilton raised with the help desk. But looking at Horizon data, if there were declared discrepancies, I would see them, but I wouldn't see an error.
If there was user error that
Yeah.
didn't result in a telephone call to the help desk,
Yeah.
that wouldn't have been picked up by your review of the call logs, would it?
If there
Because
was,
you're only reviewing those
Yeah, this-
issues that are
yeah,
raised on the
this
call.
this is calls primarily for assistance from Miss Hamilton to the help desk.
Yes. Paragraph below refers to the banks. It says, I posted disclosures signed by Mrs. Hamilton to the 2 banks in question, but the banks have advised me that they never received them. I sent out further disclosure forms to Mrs. Hamilton explaining the situation, but so far they haven't been returned. So we have here, on the 17th of May, the document that I took you to before lunch. You said in that investigation report that the only evidence was the audit identified money as missing.
Yep.
By the 30th of June, Mrs. Hamilton had given you signed authority to obtain her bank statements. And here, 11th of August, you were, for example, being told by the MBSC, or in respect of the MBSC, that user error could be was a potential cause of discrepancies. Why is it, and you're being told that there's a standard statement that's available from Fujitsu, why isn't it at this stage that you are not revisiting your initial investigation report or making further inquiries of Fujitsu in respect of the particular concerns that Mrs. Hamilton had raised?
User error can happen at any time, and if there was, and say other than the scenario I gave where you've given a customer too much money, then generally over a relatively short period of time, from my understanding, is a transaction correction would come back. So if you cause an error and your accounts go down, the current transaction comes back and the accounts recalibrate.
I'm not talking specifically about user error. I'm just talking about everything that you've learnt by this date. You don't seem to have in any way revisited your opinion that a charge of theft would be appropriate.
Sorry, I missed that last bit. Sorry, my hearing's not the best.
There is nothing that has shown you since your original investigation, nothing to build upon that charge of
Yeah.
theft, was there? You hadn't received any further
No,
evidence that
I
made...
don't think so. No,
No. Can we please look at...
not in respect to the call logs, anyhow. No.
Well, irrespective of the call logs, we've seen the investigation report, and then we've seen what you called a further 2 memo. So that is
Yeah.
your standard second step,
Yeah.
responding after the investigation report. You haven't received any further evidence to make you more sure of theft or anything along those lines, have you?
I'm going to say I believe that the theft was, an offence that was committed, because there's nothing to come back to show that this £36,000 attributed to any errors that I was aware of.
That's it in a nutshell, isn't it? You thought that the auditor had identified a loss of £36,000. You believed Horizon was accurate, and therefore there must have been a theft. That's what it boils down to, isn't it?
Pretty much, sir. And
Yeah. And nothing happened during the course of the investigation thereafter that deflected you from that opinion. That's what it boils down to also, isn't it?
again, I can't recall, but from looking at this, I think my my fault was that it remained theft. Yes.
Yeah. Fine.
Thank you. Could we look at poll 000498083, please? Now, October 2007, the bottom email is an email from Richard Jory, who was, I believe, counsel in this case. And he is emailing Jennifer Andrews in the criminal law team. He says, Juliet, or Jenny, counsel defending has offered pleas to false accounting in this matter, I presume counts 2 to 9 inclusive, and asked me to take instructions as to whether this might be an appropriate offer. My view is that there is evidence she's taken the money and that there is sufficient evidence to support theft, but Royal Mail may be content with guilty pleas to dishonesty matters if she undertook to repay the amount of the shortage, i.e. £36,644.89. It might be worth speaking to the officers, Graham Brander and Colin Price, to canvass their views. We then have an email from Jennifer Andrews to yourself. Could you provide your views with regard to pleas indicated as soon as possible? And the top email is from you responding, saying, I agree with counsel. In my opinion, the evidence clearly shows theft, charge 1. However, if the defence are offering up guilty pleas to all false accounting charges, then I would suggest we accept this on the understanding that Mrs. Hamilton agrees to repay the full amount. So you are there giving an opinion and suggesting that it is accepted. We spoke earlier about who is the decision maker in respect of the acceptance of pleas and the bringing of charges. It seems there that you are very much filling the shoes of the senior security manager, aren't you?
No, I said any decision in respect of whether we accept this would need to be made by Dave Pardo.
Well, your view is canvassed by the criminal law team in the email below. Could you provide your views with regard to pleas? And you are giving quite a definitive opinion there, aren't you?
I've asked for my opinion and I agree with counsel.
Do you think it was an appropriate thing to be giving an opinion on?
Well, if I don't think counsel found it appropriate, then surely counsel wouldn't have asked the investigator?
Are you sure that you ran this past the senior security manager?
I have no idea. It's 2007.
You've said that the senior security manager made the decision in every case. Might it be possible that this is a case where the senior security manager didn't make the decision?
It's possible. I've gone back to the criminal law team and said it needs to be made by Dave Pardo. I'm going to say also include that email. It says investigation team post office, so that would have been the generic email for the investigation team. So I can't say whether. Well, actually saying it, I can actually see that Dave Pardo's copied in.
Are you aware of Dave Pardo ever disagreeing with your opinion in respect of acceptance of pleas?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I'm going to say I don't recall this coming up very often, whereby I'd be asked my opinion, because ultimately that would be for the, once we got to this stage, it would be like council deciding.
Is that right? By this stage, when council were advising, was it effectively acceptance of council's advice?
Well, as I say, I can't recall exactly how it worked, but certainly in this case, Dave Pardo was copied into what I've, how I've responded with my opinion, and the fact that it should be for Dave Pardo to consider. I can't recall this case or any other particular cases whereby I've been asked to give my opinion, but council, if they need opinion sought, it might come back to the security manager, it might come back to the criminal law team. I honestly can't say.
In respect of the substantive decision, do you think it was appropriate to offer a lesser charge in return for payment of money that you couldn't prove had been stolen?
I'm not a lawyer, so it's not really my decision on what charges to charge with or accept.
If you're not a lawyer...
I'll happily give my opinion if I'm asked for my opinion.
But you didn't think that you were qualified to actually give that opinion?
I've given my opinion, but the decision is to be made by Dave Pardo.
Why did you give an opinion if you didn't think that you were qualified to do so?
No, I'm not saying I wasn't qualified. I said if I was asked to give an opinion, I would do my best to give an opinion, and that's what I've done. But ultimately, it's for the experts to decide on what charges are acceptable, and for the senior security manager decide whether they concur.
Can we look at poll 000495154, please? We're now in November 2007. This is correspondence to the investigation team from the principal lawyer. And she says, as you know, there's been some discussion as to whether or not pleas to false accounting would be acceptable. I note this would be agreeable, providing that Mrs. Hamilton were to repay the full amount. She says, I understand, however, that she is not yet in a position to repay and has not yet given a date on when this can be done. And she says there, one option would be for the theft count to be left on file pending payment of the date by the date of trial or some later date. Is this something that you remember discussing at the time?
No.
Did you attend any of the hearings in this case?
Typically, I would attend most, if not all, hearings, as would any security manager.
Could we look at poll 000444388, 19th of November. This is the ultimate court hearing and reporting back from the principal lawyer. She says as follows: the defendant pleaded guilty to false accounting, counts 2 to 15 on the indictment. The case has been adjourned to the 25th of January for pre-sentence reports. The defendant has been informed that full payment must be made prior to that date. The theft count has remained on file on the understanding that it should be proceeded with if the money is not repaid. And at the bottom of that page, it says, it has been made clear to the defence that there must be some recognition that the defendant had the money short of theft, and that a plea on the basis that the loss was due to the computer not working properly will not be accepted. Having attended that hearing, presumably you were present at those discussions.
Yeah, I attended, but I don't recall whether that statement actually came up in court or whether that was just reported back. It looks like it would have been covered in court, but I certainly can't remember that far back.
Would you have been the only investigator in court, or would Mr. Pardo, for example, have been present?
No, Mr. Pardo wouldn't have been there.
Insofar as there needed to be liaison with an investigator, were you the appropriate person on that occasion to be liaising with and discussing next steps?
It was always the investigator that attended court hearings, but we're not the experts there. There would also be someone from the criminal law team, usually one of the either the solicitor or one of the the legal analysts or legal executives. Somebody from the prosecution support office.
And who would they take their instructions from?
Who would they take their instructions from?
Yes.
Well, I should imagine counsel will take instructions from the criminal law team.
And who do the criminal law team take their instructions from?
I should imagine a senior security manager.
And the senior security manager not being present at court, do you recall on this occasion who instructions were taken from in respect of this agreement?
I'm certainly not. I had to read that paragraph a few times to try and even understand it. I've not instructed. I don't even understand. Recognise that terminology. That would have been whoever's made that statement would have been criminal law team or counsel.
I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic, but just sticking with the Hamilton case, and I'll take this very quickly because you've already given evidence in relation to your understanding of the disclosure process, but I just want to look through the schedules that were completed. Can we look at poll 000599376, please? You'll recall this morning I asked you about a paragraph in your witness statement where you said that the criminal law team would deal with any disclosure to the defence. I think you accept that, in fact, you were ultimately responsible for disclosure. And if we look over the page, we can see the schedule that's signed by you.
Yeah, so
Sure.
I would produce a committal bundle, and if further evidence was required, I might do further schedules, but I also believe that the prosecution support office would also disclose things.
So would you not be the single point of contact for disclosure?
I don't think so. Certainly from doing the committal, so the bulk will be covered on the committal bundle. Once it gets into the court process, something, council may require something else, and then, or it may well be that they've asked for something to be produced as an exhibit, so it might come off the unused, then get a statement that goes on the exhibits. But typically, from how I remember it, I would submit the committal bundle, and in terms of disclosure via the criminal law team, that would generally be all I would do.
So I properly understand this. Are you saying that you would create the schedule of unused material, but there may be further unused material that come from another route within the post office that you're not aware of?
If I've been asked to conduct further inquiries or something else comes to light, and I can only think of the one case because it's in the bundle, and I can't quite remember which case it was, but there was further documentation, it might have been Mrs. Hamilton's case, that the defence had made council aware of, and I don't recall it, but I had to go up to Chambers to look through loads of ring binders containing documentation. So I think possibly that then was added to another unused material statement. So in that scenario, but I can't recall any others. Not to say that there weren't, but that's just, I believe, an example where further inquiries were required or further items were identified, and it was then added to, I believe, the unused material.
In your recollection, who would decide whether there was material that might reasonably be considered capable of undermining the prosecution case or assisting the defence case, which hadn't already been disclosed?
Yeah, so that was when we're doing the committal bundle, filling these forms anyhow. Then obviously there's one of the forms is unused material that may undermine the prosecution, assist the defence. So the security manager was tasked with doing that, so they would fill that form in.
Aside from the form filling, though, who do you consider was responsible for determining what might reasonably be considered capable of undermining or assisting? The security manager would present it as they thought, but obviously then the criminal law team and council would obviously have a view on it, and there were, I think, things were moved, or there was times when I've been asked to give a deeper explanation of some things on the unused material. Can we look at poll 000482205? And we'll see a series of memos over 2006 and 2007 that are sent by the criminal law team to the investigation team, copied to you. This is the first of those. If we scroll down to the bottom, it says, I list below the statements which appear to be necessary in this case, but the investigation manager should also consider whether there are any other areas which can usefully be covered, etc. And it refers at number 5 over the page to a copy statement dealing with the Horizon system and confirming that the calls could not have been attributed to the discrepancy in the accounts. Did you see it as part of your role to carry out investigations as to the reliability of the Horizon system?
Well, basically, I would have, when I would have conducted the inquiries as part of the investigation, once it went up to criminal law, from memory, it was quite reactive. So whatever they asked for, I would endeavour to obtain.
So you would wait for them to ask for information, and you would see it as your job to go and...
If something else came about, or I was still conducting inquiries, then I would do it myself. But I think once the case file went up, most, if not all, inquiries have been conducted.
If we scroll down, you'll see their wording that's included in other memos. It says, you will be aware of the provisions of the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act 1996 concerning disclosure. Please confirm whether there is any material which might reasonably be considered capable of undermining the prosecution case or assisting the defence case, and which has not already been disclosed. Please also let me have, and there are various forms there. And there's another example of that at Pol 000484473. I think this is, in fact, the document that you were referring to where there's reference to something being taken off of the unused material list because it's become an exhibit. That's number 3. And then at the bottom paragraph, it's again standard wording. I remind you that the requirement for the disclosure to the defence is a continuing duty. If there's any such material, etc., please forward this to the post office immediately, to this office immediately. If you're in any doubt, etc. In your witness statement, as we went over, you said that the criminal law team would deal with any disclosure to the defence. Looking at this and looking back now, would it be more accurate to say that, in fact, you were responsible for, ultimately responsible for disclosure decisions?
As I said, I would disclose it to the criminal law team, and I'd assume they would disclose everything to the defence, but I didn't know what they did disclose. I think it's terminology. I didn't see myself as a disclosure officer. It was just one of the many tasks that the security manager had to deal with, because there was no separate disclosure officer.
Thank you. I'm now going to move on to the case study of Lynette Hutchings. Could we please look at Pol 00113278? That's the judgment in the Hamilton Court of Appeal case. I just want to, again, take you to the relevant part that deals with the Hutchings case. That's page 57, paragraphs 267 to 272. And just to assist everybody who is sitting here today, I'm just going to briefly outline what this case is about. The Court of Appeal say that on the 30th of July 2012, Lynette Hutchings pleaded guilty to 1 count of false accounting. The Post Office offered no evidence against her on 1 count of fraud, and a not guilty verdict was entered. They say that between the 1st of June 2010 and the 5th of April 2011, Ms Hutchings made 33 calls to the National Business Support Centre, 2 of which related to losses or gains. DIP samples covering the 13th of January to the 30th of March showed that she had made 4 calls to the Horizon Help Desk for advice. Ms Hutchings produced a prepared statement at her interview under caution, saying that problems had arisen since her branch had transferred to Horizon Online. She had believed that the incorrect balances would be sorted out by transaction corrections in the fullness of time. She had not stolen any money, nor had she acted dishonestly. She gave specific examples of problems she had experienced, including the fact that the Post Office advice was difficult to access and unreliable. In her written basis of plea, Ms Hutchings said that she had balanced the books to put off the evil day of having to sort out the muddle. She had not taken any money, nor had she intended to. That basis was not accepted by the prosecution, but they did not contest it. If we look at paragraph 271, the final part of that paragraph, it says there was no investigation into the integrity of the Horizon figures. The investigation concentrated on proving how the accounts were falsified, which was admitted, rather than examining the root cause of the shortfall. There was no investigation of Ms Hutchings' complaints as set out in her prepared statement. There was no proof of an actual loss as opposed to a Horizon-generated shortfall. I want to take you to the interview that was carried out with Ms Hutchings, and that can be found at Pol 000564117, please. We have 2 records of interviews. This is the first of those 2, and you are listed there as the interviewing officer alongside Gary Thomas. if we scroll down, we can see there various things that you referred to before as being part of the interview process. So reminded of rights, confirmed, solicitor explained the caution, not under arrest, free to leave, etc. All of those are set out in the record of interview. Could we turn over the page, please? This is her written statement. I'm going to read some of it. It says, "I am Lynette Hutchings. This statement is my version of events, and I've asked my solicitor to write it down. We migrated to Horizon Online in approximately May/June 2010. At the time of migration, all accounts balanced. Ever since we have been with Horizon Online, the balances have been wrong. When I talk about we, I also refer to my husband, who assists me in the post office. At no stage have we stolen money from the post office, nor are we aware of making mistakes in our today operation of the system. Because of this, we always believed that incorrect balances would be sorted out through transaction corrections. When I altered the cash declarations, this was not done in order to create a financial gain for myself or a loss to the post office. I genuinely believe that there was no loss and that the balances would be corrected in the fullness of time. The only reason the cash declarations were altered was to enable me to operate the post office. I'm unable to explain why the balances are incorrect, but would give examples of some of the difficulties as follows. The helpline was difficult to access and unreliable. Secure stock created unexplained discrepancies on a weekly basis. The screen on the stock unit needed recalibrating on occasions due to cursor sticking. The back office printer was replaced because it was unreliable. The small printers stuck and not produced expected receipts. One monitor crashed and the power pack had to be replaced, etc. Would you agree that the reliability of the Horizon system was front and centre of her defence to this case?
Well, I think she's referred to a few occasions where equipment needed to be replaced. As I say, I can't recall the detail, but I think, did we not get a statement from Andy Dunks that explained all the calls in this case?
That wasn't actually my question. My question was about her case and her defence. Do you agree that the reliability of the Horizon system was central to her defence?
Oh, no, absolutely. In her prepared statement, she's saying that, where is it? She's listed a few issues that she's had with the Horizon equipment.
I just want to move to page 8, please. Mr. Thomas, your co-interviewing officer, says as follows to Ms. Hutchings. He says, "Okay, in respect of obviously we have Izzy today and you've prepared a statement, etc. Is there any reason I could ask you why you've actually got Izzy Hogg as your solicitor and not somebody from," and then it's not clear what's said, "do you not have any solicitors locally?" Do you consider that to be an appropriate question to put to a defendant in an interview?
So when I was looking through the documentation, I did see that, and I don't understand it, to be honest.
Were you aware?
That was a reason why Gary's asked that at the time, but I don't know what it would have been.
Were you aware that Izzy Hogg had represented, for example, Joe Hamilton, Seema Misra, and other defendants?
I wasn't aware of Seema Misra, but I was aware that Izzy Hogg was the person I spoke to in respect of Mrs. Hamilton, but Izzy Hogg wasn't the solicitor in attendance at the interview.
Yes. You were sitting next to Mr. Thomas in this interview. If he had said something like that, which is recorded in the transcript, would that not have struck you as slightly odd?
As I say, I honestly don't know. I can't say. Looking at it now, it did strike me as slightly odd, but going back in time, there may have been some reason why Gary's asked that. Perhaps Gary was aware of other cases where Izzy had represented people.
And what possible relevance could that have to whether this individual was guilty or not of a criminal offence?
Well, at face value, I don't see it does.
See, the suggestion, it seems from there, is that in some way those who are conducting these interviews held it against defendants if they were represented by a particular solicitor. The suggestion being perhaps that that solicitor is helping to run a particular argument in a range of cases.
I don't think that's the case. You can have whoever you like as your legal representative.
Absolutely. So why do you think it was considered to be a relevant question to be asked?
As I say, I can't answer why Gary's asked that question.
Can we move on to the next interview? That's poll 000445505. This interview is largely a no-comment interview. But if we go to page 15, halfway down page 15, it does seem to be a substantive answer to the question of the branch trading statement showing no discrepancies, and her being asked, was it a true and correct cash figure declared on the account on that day? And she says no. Do you recall that at all?
Yeah, I think that was a requirement when we were, there was an audit shortfall investigation. We would put cash accounts or branch trading statements to them and ask if the cash figure was a true reflection of the cash that was on hand. So I think that's fairly standard.
And that's an admission from her that it wasn't true. It wasn't a correct cash
Yes, she's
declaration.
saying no, it wasn't a true figure.
Can we please go back to a document that we started with this morning, and that is poll 000466706, and that is the investigation report from this particular case study. It's the 5th of May 2011 investigation report. I read to you from it this morning. I'm just going to repeat, it's page 5. In fact, could we go to the bottom of page 4 and down to page 5? And slightly up. Thank you, perfect. So you can see there a paragraph that begins, I was made aware that, and that's something I'm just going to ask you just to hold in your mind when we look at another document. It may be that I can bring them both up on screen next to each other. On Friday, and then next paragraph, on Friday the 15th of April, I was contacted by Miss Izzy Hogg, solicitor, who was representing Miss Hutchings. It was agreed that I would conduct a voluntary interview. And then over the page, it details what was said in the interview and the detail of the prepared statement. So it says, from the prepared statement, it can be seen that Mrs. Hutchings believed she migrated to Horizon Online in May/June, although I established just prior to the commencement of the interview that the migration date was the 5th of July. It states that at the time of the migration, all accounts balanced. It then goes on to suggest that problems arose following the migration to Horizon Online. It states that only her and her husband worked in the post office, and at no stage had they stolen any money. It states that they only served against their own usernames and did not know each other's passwords. It states that Ms. Hutchings altered cash declarations, and that's the admission that I just took you to, but not in order to create a gain for herself or a loss to the post office, and that she felt the balances would be corrected through transaction corrections. She stated that she only altered the cash declarations in order to continue to operate the post office. The prepared statement refers to some difficulties that she encountered. These related to unexplained stock discrepancies, problems with Horizon equipment, and that the helpline was difficult to access and unreliable. This is the investigation report, and I now want to take you to another report. I think it's the disciplinary investigation report, and this being the criminal investigation report, and it's poll 000445508. If it's possible to have that document side by side with this, that would be ideal. So if we look at the final page on the left-hand side, that one's dated the 6th of May. The one on the right-hand side is the 5th of May, and they're slightly different. And you explained this morning that a disciplinary investigation report is slightly different to a criminal investigation report. Is that correct? Is the one on the left-hand side, does it look like a disciplinary investigation report?
No, the one on the left it's got personnel. I don't understand that because it's got personnel at the top and legal at the bottom. Can you go to if it's addressed to? Did you say it was Nigel Allen? Was it?
If we could go to the first page of the one on the left.
Yeah, so it's headed to Nigel Allen. So this obviously I've not changed the footer to personnel. So yeah, this is the discipline one.
So the one on the left is the discipline
Yes.
one. Thank you. Could we turn to page 3 of the discipline one? So 3 on the left. And could we have a look at page 4 on the right? And could that one on the right be a full half? Thank you very much. You'll recall that I took you to the point where I said I was made aware that. So if we have a look on the right, that is on near the bottom, there's a paragraph that says I was made aware that there were 2 errors. And on the left, the discipline report, it says I was made aware that there were 2 errors on the final paragraph. Thank you. The one on the right, as we've seen, if we scroll over the page on the right, goes on to detail Mrs. Hutchings' account and interview and the detail of that interview. It also then refers to telephone call with Mr. Allen, talking about the logs. If we look on the left-hand side, if we scroll over the page on the left-hand side, there is no summary of the interview. There is no summary at all of Mrs. Hutchings' account as provided in the interview. You said that certain information was left out of the disciplinary investigation report, that things like appendixes or similar documents. Was it standard not to include a sub-postmaster's account in a disciplinary investigation report?
I don't think so. Whether it was because it was summarised in a prepared statement, I honestly can't say.
Do you think it would have been helpful to those considering disciplinary investigations to know what was said by a defendant in a interview?
As I was saying, my recollection was that it would almost be identical, other than the fact that you would remove reference to exhibits and appendices and whatever. And I think there was a period of time when the failings in procedure were included in both reports, but at a time it was removed from the discipline one, and that was emailed separately.
Can you think of any good reason why the account in this case doesn't seem to be included?
Well, I'm not sure, because it's a summary of the prepared statement, which obviously came from the Mrs. Hamilton and the defence solicitor, so I'm really not sure.
And it's summarised as follows in the one on the left. It says, from the summaries, it can be seen that Ms. Hogg reads out a prepared statement, following which Mrs. Hutchings answers no comments to questions put to her. But there's no detail contained in that report of the kind that we see on the right-hand side.
So I'm struggling to correlate the two. I can see from the summaries it can be seen on the third paragraph on the left one.
Yes, and on the right is the detail that isn't included on the left-hand side. So all of those
Right.
top half of that page is not included at all.
So obviously on the left, I'm going to say,
If you look on the
can
left-hand side...
we go one page above, please, on the right-hand one?
Yes.
Right, okay. I can't see where the bottom of page 2 finishes, and sorry, I know it's a pain. The one on the left, can we go up a page? I'm just trying to see where they were last the same.
So it's there. I was made aware that there were 2 errors. That paragraph is included.
Right, okay, yeah,
But then they depart from one another over the page
yeah.
on the left-hand side. And that's different. And if we look on the right-hand side, if we go over the page, they meet up again where it says, as can be seen from the tape summaries. So that's the
Yeah,
bottom of
I
page right.
As I say, I really don't know why. I'm going to say there would have been some reason, but I don't know what the reason would have been. Because normally it was the same report with just certain things omitted for the discipline report.
Yes, I mean, would you accept that it's not helpful to have a sub-postmaster's account removed from a discipline report?
Well, yeah, I can't explain why it's not there, because as I say, we would not, because they need to consider that when they're considering that with things like the audit report and any other evidence that they've gathered themselves to make a decision. So there must have been some logical reason why it's not there, but I cannot recall why not.
Can we stick with the right-hand side, please? And I just want to read, there's a paragraph there that I haven't read out, and it begins prior to the interview commencing. And it says, prior to the interview commencing, I telephoned Mr. Allen, who advised me that he had a schedule of call logs made by Rowlands Castle Post Office to the Post Office helpline. He then emailed it to me, and I printed off a copy. The first entry, and it gives the date. They're relevant. Beyond that, they relate to the branch being closed for the audit. It gives a date. And after that, there's one call from the interim sub-postmaster and one relating to the request for a call log. You had spoken to Mr. Allen and requested a schedule of call logs made to the post office helpline. We're aware of a separate helpline being held by Fujitsu, the help desk, the Horizon System help desk. Did you make inquiries of Fujitsu systems in respect of this matter?
As I say, I don't recall it, but from reading the documentation, it seems, I think Nigel Allen was due to conduct the disciplinary interview with Miss Hutchins, and it was then that he gave me the evidence that he had been given by, I think, the auditor. I can't recall why, the purpose of, the conversation with Mr. Allen. I hadn't requested. He obviously made me aware that he had a schedule of call logs to the post office helpline, not the Horizon support help desk. So clearly I've asked them to email them over to me.
Was it more common for you to obtain information from the post office helpline than it was the Fujitsu?
No, absolutely. It's purely because for whatever reason I spoke to Mr. Allen, he made me aware that he had them. So I said, clearly have said, can you send them over?
But in terms of a typical case, for example,
In terms of a what, sorry?
a typical case, was it more common for you to obtain post office helpline information? We spoke earlier about, for example,
Yeah.
difficulties with ARQ data. In respect of the Horizon help desk information? Was it straightforward? Did you regularly obtain that information, or did you rely more on the post office's own helpline?
I think,
records?
I can't remember if they were requested all through the post office helpline or how, excuse me, how I got them from the Horizon Support Help Desk. I think it, excuse me, I think it was possibly all through the help desk, but the actual call logs that Mr. Allen sent me would have been the same way. He would have got them from the post office help desk.
Okay. We can move on. One final document in relation to this particular case, and that is POL 000-46626. It's an email from Jarnail Singh, sorry, a memo from Jarnail Singh, copied to you, but to the National Security Team. If we could scroll down, please. He says, the defence solicitors read out a pre-prepared statement, which was followed by no comments to all questions put to the defendant. Bearing this in mind and the contents of the pre-prepared statement, it's very likely that the above-named defendant may contest the case. It appears from the contents that she may bring into question her claim that the Horizon system was not working properly and refers to some of the difficulties the defendant encountered with the system. I'm therefore of the view that it would be more prudent for the officer to complete his inquiries and further investigations and produce the evidence by means of witness statements and exhibits at this stage, and list certain things that needed to be obtained. If we go over the page, it's number 5 and 6 that I'd like to look at. Number 5 says the officer should find evidence rebutting the allegations and criticisms made in the pre-prepared statement, which was read out by the defendant's solicitor in the defendant's interview under caution. Evidence is needed to rebut these, and then statements dealing with the integrity of the Horizon and call logs to the Horizon Support Help Desk, which should also go into some depth explaining the workings of the system. Do you recall making inquiries with Fujitsu in respect of this matter?
As I say, I don't recall the case at all.
Do you recall ever making inquiries with Fujitsu other than requesting those standard statements in respect of any concerns with the integrity of the Horizon system?
Not specifically, but I can see from the documentation that there was some references to either what's a standard statement and then some that would cover the integrity of Horizon, but I must admit I thought the standard statement covered the integrity of Horizon. But either way, if I'm requesting statements, it will be on the behalf of the criminal law team, and it will go through the relevant security admin department to actually go to whoever in Fujitsu and ask for them.
Looking at this particular case, obviously there were some examples of problems with Horizon that were raised in the prepared statement and interview. From your recollection, in this kind of a case, would you simply rely on a statement from Fujitsu rather than making direct inquiries with Fujitsu about the reliability of the Horizon system?
Well, as I said, anything that we got from Fujitsu, we would do from a central point in security. I wouldn't request anything directly from Fujitsu unless, for example, I'm emailing Andy or Penny directly just to say, when can we expect your statement? Because obviously the clock's ticking. But the initial request, I wouldn't be requesting it myself, only via the security admin team that submitted the requests.
And is that Mr. Ward or somebody else?
I think looking at this as addressed to Maureen Moores, I think it was what was then referred to as part of the crime risk team that would do it. I'm not even sure there actually was a casework team per se at that stage. Certainly Mr. Ward in 2011, I'm pretty sure, would have been a financial investigator at that time.
So was it later that he carried out that function of liaising with Fujitsu or?
It would have, from recollection, it was either through the casework team originally, and then it was this crime risk team. But either way, it was, even within the casework team, it may or may not have been Graham Ward that did it, or whoever was the casework manager at the time. There was other like direct reports in a support function within the casework team. And likewise, I think Maureen was like in a support function within the crime risk team. But either way, whichever relevant department it was, to all intents and purposes, it was an admin team within security that would make the requests, or as we've seen, Graham Ward, in his capacity as casework manager, would make requests.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the final case study, and I'll be very brief with this case study. This is the case of Julian Wilson. Can we look again at the Court of Appeal judgment, poll 00113278, please? It's page 43 of that judgment. Paragraph 175 to 178. Page 43. Thank you. Very briefly, the appeal in Mr. Wilson's case was brought posthumously. He had pleaded guilty to 2 accounts of fraud. It appears that 3 counts of false accounting did not proceed. In his interview under caution, Mr. Wilson said that he had raised problems with Horizon with his line manager and was told there was nothing wrong with the system. In his resignation letter to his contract manager, he stated that he had raised the problem of misbalances on 3 occasions and received no adequate response. In an agreed basis of plea, Mr. Wilson stated that the losses occurred because of staff or systemic errors and not because the money had been stolen. He admitted to inflating the cash on hand figures over 5 years to ensure that the accounts balanced, but believed that the alleged shortfall was due to problems with Horizon. And the Court of Appeal notes there that in the paragraph 177, about halfway through, the Post Office did not investigate any of the criticisms of Horizon made by Mr. Wilson historically and during his detailed interview. And we'll look at, very briefly at what he said about Horizon in interview. Can we look at poll 00050140, please? So you're one of the interviewing officers, again with Gary Thomas. Was it quite regular for you to work with Gary Thomas on cases to interview together?
Yeah, I think more often than not, due to the fact that we were relatively close to each other in respect of other members of the team.
Thank you. Could we scroll down? And it's here that Mr. Wilson gave his account. He says, for example, I had an audit some 6 months later and everything on the audit was fine. I had trained for 1 week when I first covered the post office. I didn't have any more training after that. So not all of the transactions that I carried out I was familiar with. So I therefore had to ask a member of staff how to perform a particular transaction had it not come up during the first week of training. When I balance every Wednesday as required by Post Office Limited. Some weeks it was up, some weeks it was down. And I kept a record of all those transactions as to what was up and down during, my period as a postmaster. I at one time had a manager who's the line manager in those days, I think they were called, and I raised the question of misbalances with him, and I'd been keeping a record. I said, could the system be wrong, or are we doing? He said, no, the system cannot be wrong, as there's nothing wrong with the system. Perhaps 2 years ago, we had a letter sent round from the Federation as to whether anybody was experiencing misbalances. I said that I had, and I actually then was asked to submit to the Federation copies of trading reports. This relates to the trading reports, not the old system, and I sent copies of those to the Federation. So again, straight away in his case, he raised issues with the Horizon system in interview. I mean, looking at these case studies that I've taken you to, each one raising issues with the Horizon system, I know that you've explained that the casework team would liaise with Fujitsu,
Yep.
but as an investigator, do you think that you did enough investigating in respect to problems with the Horizon system?
I'm really not sure what I could have done. I must say, I can't go. It wouldn't have been my mindset to do so because I think when the increased number of cases come about, we were getting messages from various sources, I believe, saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with Horizon, whatever. So that was in my mindset. But I don't see how a security manager could go to Fujitsu and say, or anyone, and say, can you check the integrity? Because I believe that that's what Fujitsu were doing when they were being asked to produce statements.
You were an investigating officer tasked with investigating criminal offences that could lead to people's convictions and imprisonment. Do you not think that you should have been trying to find out more about these alleged issues and pressing Fujitsu in respect of
And so, again, it wouldn't be for me to go to Fujitsu, but there may well have been questions asked amongst the team with these cases that I really can't recall.
But you were the person who was investigating those cases.
Well,
so-
not this case, I wasn't. I was second officer. I was only there for the interview.
Absolutely. But some of the cases that I've taken you to, you were, for example, the disclosure officer and had specific duties relating to disclosure, specific duties to pursue reasonable lines of inquiry. Did you think that it was unreasonable to pursue those kinds of lines of inquiry?
All I can say, Mr. Blake, is from recollection, I had no reason to believe that there was any issue with the integrity of Horizon, because that was the message that came through. That seemed to be conveyed in the statements. As I say, we'd had challenges that had gone through the court system and none not held. So I can't say for certain, but I'm just surmising that was probably why I, like no doubt others, had the mindset that there was no issue with Horizon.
Who was the message coming from internally at the post office? You've said a number of times that was
Yeah.
the message. Who was it coming from?
As I say, I think I can't think specifically or where the sources were. I think once there was a number of cases being, at the latter stages, possibly it was coming down the line from, like senior security, whether that was the fraud strand leader, whether that was the head of security, whenever we had national meetings, I don't know. But it was just always the belief, and I had no reason to disbelieve that Horizon wasn't working. So I think it's possibly a combination, because there were times when there were becoming more and more cases where there were challenges. So again, I can't recall specific, but I'm sure there was messages saying, no, Horizon's fine. But I don't know, I couldn't give you a name of who said that or a particular source.
One final document in Mr. Wilson's case. Can we look at poll 000444767, please? This is a summary of facts that was prepared for the magistrates to consider suitability for the Magistrates' Court or the Crown Court. Is this a document that you would have seen at the time? Is it a document you prepared? Do you recall this document?
Well, as I say, I wasn't the investigator, but this doesn't look like something the investigator would have done.
Thank you very much. Those are all my questions in relation to this case study. I have a few very brief miscellaneous topics. The first is Mr. Gareth Jenkins. Can we look at FUJ 00156-530, please? And could we start on page 3? Thank you. There's a email here that you're not a party to yet, and that is an email from Emma Haley to Andrew Bulk. and she says, council would, it's a case of Bramwell. Is that a case that you remember at all? Royal Mail against Bramwell?
I did until I saw the documentation. I vaguely recall it, and I think it was Mike Wilcox's case, and I was second officer. And I think when Mike left, it was transferred to me, I believe.
So it says, council would bluntly like Fujitsu to pour as much cold water as possible on the defence report. If the expert is saying we cannot disagree with anything at all, then we are potentially in some difficulty. I've asked council to provide a specific list of questions, but really the essence is how much, if anything, can we rebut? So it seems as though there is a defence report about addressing Horizon. She says there, I mentioned to council Mr. Brander's suggestion of barrister training in Cardiff. That might be ideal. Are you able to assist us with what barrister training in Cardiff might have been a reference to?
I think it might have been like training on the use of Horizon. I can't be certain, but I think possibly that was. I'm going to say, because I see that the barristers, the chambers are in Cardiff. My recollection was that they would be at Bell in London. But so whether we had started using a different chambers and they might not have been as au fait as our barristers in London, I don't know. But
so that's training for prosecution counsel. That's prosecution counsel it's talking about in terms
oh,
of
absolutely,
training.
yes.
Could we go to page 2, please? And it's the bottom of page 2, and this is where you are included in the email, so you will have received that chain. It says, Graham, please see Emma's email for your information. Could you see if Fujitsu can work with these rather vague instructions? Otherwise, I think the only way forward is for you to meet with Sue as soon as possible to help her understand the system and iron out the specifics that need to be addressed. It would seem easiest if you could contact Sue's clerk, so that it seems to be counsel, it's called Sue. Could we scroll up to the bottom of page 2? You then email Penny Thomas, and you say, hi Penny, please would you look at the email below from our solicitors in the Bishop's Hull case and pass on to Gareth. Council would like Gareth to advise on what from the defence expert report facts to you last week that he's able to rebut, if anything. I've asked for an electronic copy of the expert report, but it's down to the defence as to whether they're prepared to supply this, as they're only required to serve a hard copy. In your witness statement for this inquiry, I think you've said that you have no recollection of the name Gareth Jenkins.
No, not at all until I saw this.
Do you know why that might be, given that you're referring to him by his first name there? It seems, certainly from that email, that you seem to be quite familiar with.
I can only assume that I was advised that Gareth was the person to give a statement in that respect, because previously my understanding was it would have been Penny Thomas.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to actually take you back to a document that we've looked at. It's a different page of the same document. It's poll 001122329, please. And it's page 63. That's exactly the issue that I'd like your assistance with. And it's the role of Penny Thomas. If we look at page 63 of this document, there's an email from you to Phil Taylor in the case of Wendy Buffery. Thank you. And it's the third paragraph in that email. You say, only Penny Thomas performs the expert witness role for Fujitsu. As you probably gathered, we have enough problems getting Andy Dunks to produce the call logs, let alone the entire workings of Horizon. As such, if defence wish to cross-examine on Horizon, i.e. Penny's statement, then we'll have to rearrange trial dates. If Penny isn't required to give evidence in person, then we're okay. So I don't know if Alex wants to speak to defence counterpart to gauge if Penny will be required. Why is it that you describe Penny Thomas there as the expert witness, as performing the expert witness role for Fujitsu?
Because that would have been my understanding, whether that was correct or not. But that, I think it's because Penny was the one that was producing the bulk of the statement. So when she was doing the Horizon data and then covering the workings of Horizon, so that's probably why I thought it was Penny Thomas. So I don't think I was even aware of somebody called Gareth Jenkins until the Bramwell case.
And what did you understand an expert witness role to involve?
Somebody just had an expert knowledge of the relevant subject matter, I guess.
Was it something that you had received any training or instruction in, or were there any policies that you're aware of?
Having seen bits about expert witnesses in the bundle and the inquiry, no, then I'm pretty sure my understanding, let me phrase that, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have understood exactly what an expert was in their duties at that time, having seen what I've seen recently.
Thank you, that can come down. And then I have just a couple of very small topics. The first is Crown offices. Did you experience any differences in attitude towards Crown Office employees to sub-postmasters in respect of the approach to investigations?
Not from anything I dealt with or was, where I assisted in an interview with a colleague. As far as we were concerned, if there was evidence of a criminal offence, everyone would be treated the same, and in my experience, that would be fairly and professionally.
Were there any differences in the proportion of Crown Office employees that you investigated compared to...
Sorry, any difference in the...
Proportion of Crown Office employees compared to sub-postmasters?
Well, I think there were less because there were far less Crown offices than there were sub-post offices.
Thank you. Another topic, your role as the Network Transformation Field Change Advisor. Were there any financial incentives, such as bonuses, to convert branches to the new model?
I think so, yes. I think there was for a period of time an incentive bonus. I can't remember what the criterion was, but there was a bonus of some sort, yeah.
And was that to get people to change the contract that they were on?
Yeah, well, if they converted to either the local or the mains model, whichever one was attributed to them, then yes, they would get a new contract. But although there was an incentive bonus, when we started the process, we're absolutely inundated with postmasters either wanting to leave because they would have at the time received the payment equivalent to 18 months of their best year of remuneration out of the last 3, which fairly quickly, I believe, moved to 26 months, which from my understanding was possibly more than they would have obtained from looking to do a commercial transfer where they might sell their retail business and market the post office alongside it. But the postmaster would get a conversion payment, which I believe was 12 months of the best year out of the last 3 to convert to the local model or the mains model. So there are obviously incentives to both the postmaster, but I think because the post office were keen to get numbers of new models ASAP, that's possibly why there was an incentive bonus initially, but that bonus wasn't there for the whole time. I can't say how long it was.
Thank you. So those are all of my questions. We have questions for Mr. Maloney and Mr. Jacobs at least.
Well, unless they're going to tell me that they're only going to be literally a few minutes, we'll have a break, all right?
Thank you, sir. Perhaps we could come back at 20 to 4.
Right.
I don't believe they're going to be very long, but they will be more than a few minutes. Thank you, sir. Mr. Jacobs.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brander. Hello. I represent 156 sub-postmasters, sub-mistresses and assistants instructed by Howe & Co. And I want to ask you about your knowledge of the bugs, errors and the defects. Now, I don't want to go over the evidence that we've heard this morning when you asked it, in your answers to questions from Mr. Blake, but do you recall you were taken to the Helen Rose report and you were taken to a synopsis of a number of sub-postmasters who'd raised Horizon issues, and one of those was our client's Pam Stubbs?
Right, I mean, yeah, as I say, I could recall that there was a larger or an increased number of challenges near or leading up to the time where I left the post office, maybe the last couple of years, but
Yeah.
Yes.
And you were taken to the page 2 of the report, and we don't need to call it up because you've seen it unless you want to see it again. But the passage was, Mike Wilcox stated, along with Graham Brandon, I met with Mrs. Stubbs on the 17th of January, and she was convinced that Horizon was at fault. And it goes on to say that Mrs. Stubbs had retained her own transaction logs and was going to compare them with Fujitsu data. So she was very much challenging the Horizon system. And Mr. Blake took you to other evidence, the case of Miss Hutchins, when at interview she again made a very strong challenge to the system. And it was suggested that this is inconsistent with what you've repeatedly said in your statement, where you say, paragraph 144, an example, I have no recollection of any specific challenges to the integrity of Horizon. And when that was put to you, you said, well, the message from above was that there were no issues with Horizon. And then you went on to say, this was about 12:15 this afternoon, you may, I'm sure it's been a long day, but you might recall saying that. You went on to say that you can't recall who that message came from.
Yep.
Now, my clients are a little anxious that a lot of people who are in senior positions who are in senior positions at the time are coming to the inquiry and are not answering this question. They're not able to say who told them to disregard, essentially, what sub-postmasters were saying about the Horizon system. So what I want to do is I just want to go through that. Could you tell me who your line managers were at the time, about in 2010, for example, which was when you spoke to Ms. Stubbs?
Well, going back, when I left, it was Jason Collins.
Right.
I cannot recall. It might have been. I think it might have been Jason. I'm just going. I was temporarily promoted, I think, for a few months in 2008. I think then Jed Harbinson acted as team leader for a fairly small period of time. It was because Jason was effectively casework manager at that stage. So I think roughly from sometime in 2009 to when I left, it might have been Jason Collins. So Jeff Hall, early days, changed teams, and I think there was Tony Utting. Paul Whittaker was just before I was temporarily promoted. Dave Posnett, I can't quite remember when he was in there, but certainly when I left, it was Jason.
Jason Collins.
Yeah, and as I say, I think, but that doesn't mean to say any message come via Jason. It might have been that we were in a national team meeting and it could have been there. As I say, I can't remember what source it was. I really, if I could, I would absolutely have no qualms saying, but I just cannot recall.
What about John Scott?
John Scott was the head of the security, so obviously when we periodically got together as a national team, there would be agenda items, but I honestly can't recall what they would be. But like everyone seems to be saying, this word robust which isn't a word that I would necessarily have used in everyday occurrences, seemed to be the word that was always used. So when I first joined investigations, because I had no IT background, this is all brand new, it was new to everybody, we had no reason to believe there was any issues, but suddenly the word robust seemed to appear, so I can just assuming that was the wording in the message we were given, but I don't know from what source.
What about David Pardo?
Well, Dave Pardo would have been, so for instance, myself as a security manager, say for instance, Jason when I left, team leader, then it would be Dave Pardo as the fraud strand leader, who would then report to John Scott.
So are you saying then that all of these people are people who could have told you the message is there's nothing wrong with the Horizon system?
It could have come from there. It could have been coming from cases from where the criminal law team has said that we've successfully rebutted, to use the terminology, cases. I don't know, but I think I do. Without being specific, I'm sure once we got to the stage where there was more and more cases challenging Horizon, there was definitely a message that come through from somewhere. So, and again, even if it was, say, John Scott, it may well be that he was given the message from somewhere else.
Okay, but when you say that a message came through from somewhere, and you said earlier on it might have been a national team meeting, are you really not able to say who that came from?
I really if I knew, I would absolutely, I'm on oath, if I could recall where and whom, I would absolutely share that with the inquiry.
So it was just a general view that you all held, is that right?
Well, I can't speak for everybody, but just speaking to colleagues, that just seemed to be the actual belief, not just in security. I think with all personnel in post office.
And did you think, when confronted by sub-postmistresses like Mrs. Stubbs, and when interviewing Ms. Hutchins, did you not think, well, there must be something wrong with that instruction, with that general view?
When there was an increase, I may well have done, but I honestly can't recall that. And as I said, it's looking back in hindsight, you can, if there was a national picture that individual security managers were fed into, and I could see the national picture, I might have a better gauge on it. So we talked over a period of time of, I think, 2006 to 2011, maybe 3 or 4 cases. And not making excuses, that would have been one of maybe 10 to 15 cases I was dealing with at a time. So you're on the constant conveyor belt of boom, 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 dealing with umpteen different cases. I don't think there was really much time to reflect and review cases. I assume that if that was being looked at, that would be looked at by a central point. It's like from the inquiry, I see that there was the Helen Rose report. I don't believe I was aware of that at the time. I may have been, but that would have made sense to me that if it was being looked at, it would have been a central point who would have had access to all cases nationally. I would only have been aware of my cases. Yes, the lady you just mentioned, I think Mr. Stubbs, I don't recall it. I would have been there for the interview and I've had no other dealings with it, but it would have made more sense to me that somebody that could have looked at this centrally could have reviewed the cases, but I don't believe that report was disseminated to people like myself. May have been, I just don't recall.
Right, I'm just going to ask if I have any more questions for you. I don't have any more questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Maloney?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Brander, I ask questions on behalf of a group of former postmasters, all of whom were prosecuted and convicted, and all of whom have had their convictions quashed. One of those former postmasters is Mrs. Josephine Jo Hamilton, who sits next to me.
Okay.
Do you recognise her, Mr. Brander?
Only from... I can't remember. I think, was there a local news article that Jo may have appeared on that I recognised her from fairly recently? Oh. And then I've seen her at, who I thought was Jo Hamilton, I've seen her at the inquiry, I've seen other evidence. Yeah. But other than seeing Joe, Mrs. Hamilton, on the, I don't know if I got that right or wrong. Was there a news article? I don't know, but I think I do recognise Joe from recent events, not from when I did the investigation.
All right. Well, I just want to ask you about 2 days, one at the start and one at the end of the investigation and prosecution of Mrs. Hamilton. And the first is the day of the audit of her post office.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Blake has asked you questions about that. In fact, it was during the course of this morning.
Yep.
You said today that your reason for going to Mrs. Hamilton's house with Elaine Ridge
Uh-huh.
was to introduce yourself and to set out how things would proceed from that day.
Yes.
But didn't you say to Mrs. Hamilton, there's a big deficit, where is it?
Sorry, say that bit again.
There's a big deficit, where is it?
No, I didn't ask her any questions relating to the investigation whatsoever.
You told her about a deficit of £30,000, didn't you?
From looking at the documentation, I said there's a deficit in excess of or around £30,000, but that's probably because that was when Miss Ridge was explaining the reason for precautionary suspending her. That would be the reason given.
And she replied to you, I'm struggling with the computer, didn't she? When you asked her about where the deficit was.
No, that's not true. I made a notebook entry of what was actually covered at the time. There was nothing discussed, and I don't believe Mrs. Hamilton made any comment whatsoever. But again, I'm only going on the documentary evidence, including the notebook entry I would have made at the time.
And then didn't you say, well, you're the only one that's had problems with it?
Okay. No, that's completely untrue.
And from where you were sitting on the sofa in the living room,
Sorry, I didn't catch that last bit.
and from where you were sitting on the sofa in the living room, do you
I have
remember?
no idea if I was sitting or standing. I cannot recall, even through looking at the documentation and my notebooks, I cannot recall going to Miss Hamilton's address.
Right, well, see if you remember this. That you began to look around the room at the objects in the room. And
Sorry, say it.
You began to look around the room at the objects in the room, and Mrs. Hamilton's late mother, who sadly died before Mrs. Hamilton's conviction was quashed, said, "This is my house as well," didn't she?
I would not be looking around. I was in and out in 10 minutes. That was time for us to introduce ourselves, for Elaine Ridge to then precautionary suspend Mrs. Hamilton, for me to explain the nature of the investigation and that I would be writing to her later that day and asking her to contact me when she felt able to be interviewed. So I was just there explaining the process because I'd been asked to attend the audit, and I was just explaining the nature of the process to Mrs. Hamilton. There's no case whatsoever would I be asking any questions relating to an investigation whereby somebody hadn't been cautioned.
No, because that would be wrong, wouldn't it?
Sorry, I didn't catch
That would be wrong, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. The second day I'd like to ask you about is the day of Mrs. Hamilton's sentencing. When Mrs. Hamilton was sentenced at Winchester Crown Court, were you present, Mr. Brander?
I was, yes.
Yeah. So you remember that? A large number of residents of Mrs. Hamilton's village, customers of the post office, turned up to court to give moral support to her. Do you remember that?
Exactly, that's the reason why I remember being at that court appearance, because it was almost surreal when the fact there were so many people, the public gallery was filled, I think every seat was taken.
And outside court, after the proceedings had concluded, the local press...
Sorry, what's the last bit?
Is it that you can't hear me, or is it you can't understand?
My hearing isn't the best, so...
Okay. Outside court, after the proceedings had concluded, the local press took group photographs of Mrs. Hamilton and those from the village who came to support her. Do you remember that?
I don't know.
Because as the press were taking photographs, do you remember saying to them as you walked past, "Don't take photos of her, she's a criminal"?
Do you want... I'm not even sure I should actually grace that. No, I wouldn't have said something like that.
That's all I ask, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is that it, Mr. Blake?
Yes, sir, it is.
Well, thank you, Mr. Brander, for giving a witness statement and for coming to give evidence. And I hope that all those co-participants who are listening and or who are present at the hearing, including, of course, Mrs. Hamilton, will have found the evidence today informative. So I'm sorry to have to announce that we are starting at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. That is because I have an appointment at 3 p.m., which I have to keep, and therefore we have to finish at 2. But I thought everyone was entitled to some explanation of why we were starting by court standards at a very early time. Thank you. I'll see you in the morning.
Thank you very much, sir.